This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1006 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings. Thanks for tuning in. Football season's right around the corner, and there's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count toward your quest for a share of $15 million. As you know, I'm drafting over there and I'm documenting things with Becoming a Best Ball Bro. You can use the information from that show to help you out as well. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-3669. In Connecticut, help is available from problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to go on bonus entry. $20 entry required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. You guys listened last week to Rich Rebar and myself talk about players to target in fantasy drafts this year. So today, the opposite is happening. It's players to avoid. This one's a little bit more difficult to do each year because it gets more of a reaction out of people. When you say negative things about a player or a situation, if one of you guys listening to this likes that player, then naturally, you're going to want to defend your take. With that being said, it's important to remember that these takes are all based on cost. We're not avoiding these players no matter what. We're avoiding them based on where they typically go in fantasy drafts. Now, I keep saying we because this episode has another guest. To help me out, I brought on my good friend Evan Silva from Establish the Run. He came prepared with 5 players that he's generally avoiding this year, and I've got 5 of my own too. We didn't fully agree on everything, but there's some good back and forth, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Okay, I won't bore you anymore. Here's my conversation on players to avoid with the great Evan Silva. All right, Evan, I talked to Reeves last week with some players to target. Today, we're going to do some players to avoid. Always the harder one to do, I feel like, because people will take it more personally whenever we talk down on a player that they like. But again, I introed with this, but this is all versus cost. We're not, avoiding these guys no matter what, but it's all versus where they're generally being drafted. We'll go back and forth. We each have 5 guys. Add commentary at the end. The other person can, and we can have a little back and forth. But you kick things off with your first player to avoid.
Yeah, and actually every year I write a shy away 30 list of 30 players to avoid in drafts, and you had me pick out 5. So this was like perfect timing because I'm in the midst of writing that right now.
Perfect.
I'm starting with Tyreek Hill. And if you think about it, there just hasn't been a single bit of positive news about Tyreek Hill since the end of the 2023 season. Okay?
Yeah.
He's 31 years old. He averaged a career low 1.7 yards per route run last year. He almost got arrested outside of the Dolphins Stadium before a game last season. He has clashed publicly with his head coach and with his quarterback, with Tua, repeatedly. He's acted like a crazy person on social media. So I definitely think that Tyreek Hill can still run very fast in a straight line. I think that he will be able to run very fast in a straight line until he's 50. You remember Darryl Green used to win the NFL's fastest man contest when he was like 42 at the end of his career. Tyreek Hill, fast guys stay fast.
Yeah.
But I have no idea where his head is at, and I think that he may not be a member of the Dolphins by the end of the 2025 season.
Do you think that wrist from last year played a role at all? Or I've had a hard time with the wrist injury because getting open and getting targets, you would have to think that Tua in his brain, or whoever's playing quarterback, in their mind, they're sitting there and they're saying, oh, I'm not going to target this guy because he has a wrist injury, which seems like a lot for the quarterback to process in that quick of a time frame, right? But at the same time, last year, Tyreek had a target on 22% of his routes run, which was the worst that he's seen since the second year of his career. And so this isn't just a, like, he wasn't able to bring in the ball situation last year. This was also he just wasn't targeted at nearly as high of a rate last year. Like, is that playing a role here? Like, is it
because he wasn't getting open as much.
Right.
If you look at Matt Harmon's reception perception, I mean, it shows that Tyreek Hill is a player in clear decline, and we usually do not see players bounce back, especially at an age like Tyreek Hill's, bounce back after they show a steep decline. So I think he's just losing athleticism. Again, he can still run very fast in a straight line, but I think he's losing athleticism. That's what happens to players when they get to that age.
Yeah. Where do you have him rank, if you don't mind me asking? Like, are you at the point where you're like 3 or 4 wide receiver spots below market, or is this just like, I'm only taking him if he falls to the 5th round, and that's the only spot that I'm going to get him?
So I have Tyreek Hill as basically a middle to late 3rd round pick, and I don't even think that I personally would take him there. I mean, there are receivers that I like better in that same range. Mike Evans. I would take the chance on the youth of Marvin Harrison Jr. George Pickens. I mean, I'm taking younger players in that range. Mike Evans isn't younger, but Mike Evans is coming off a career high yards per route run, so he's still playing at a very high level. Tyreek Hill is not. And I have Jalen Waddle significantly ahead of his ADP. And I've been getting a lot of Jalen Waddle. I think that this is a year to bet on Jalen Waddle, bet against Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of volatility in that offense in general. Arguably the worst offensive line in the league still, like at least bottom 5 in the league. And obviously that played a huge role in them throwing those outlet passes to Jonnu and Devon Achane last year, which is why, in my opinion, like Achane is still the easiest bet in that offense, just because even if they improve the line and they're able to run better, that's going to benefit Achane. And then if they don't, then that's still going to benefit Achane because they'll want some of those looks that
with Achane, I think he could catch 100 balls this year.
Right. Exactly. And so, I'm with you with Tyreek at the very least being a pretty volatile, like an insanely volatile pick. Someone who's just could easily tank at the end of the season. I'm gonna go to the quarterback position here and call out Baker Mayfield. I could go with like a Jared Goff type, but it's not as edgy as going with Baker, because I think that people look at Baker Mayfield and the pro argument for Baker is usually something, it's pretty straightforward. Something like the following: great 2024 season, probably as a real life quarterback, probably underrated still just as a player, right? They get Emeka Egbuka, and you sit there and you say, what could possibly go wrong when you have this wide receiver room and these weapons around you coming off the season that he did? And honestly, I think that the answer to that is just straight math. Like, people might hate it, but this is a game about numbers, and we have to lean into that at least to some degree. Obviously, we want to analyze this from a football perspective, but the numbers matter a whole lot in fantasy football. Baker Mayfield last year scored 21.5 standard fantasy points per game. His previous high was 17.2. So last year was most definitely an outlier season for him. Now, can he maintain that? I think that he's better than 17.2 points per game, but I don't know if he's at that 21.5 point per game level. Part of what drove that number last year was there's 2 things. One was a touchdown rate that I'll get to in a second, but the other one was he had 3.3 rushing points per game, which was almost double his highest season prior to last season. Usually, he's in that like 1 to 2 point per game range, with his rushing, but last year that improved greatly. He finishes the QB4 as a result. His previous high was QB17. But let's just say that he is better, and that we're finally comfortable with Baker as a player. Going back to the touchdown rate thing, he had a 7.2% touchdown rate last year, which is just touchdowns divided by attempts. Since 2011, 15 quarterbacks who had next season data have been between 6.7% and 7.7% in touchdown rates. So that's within plus or minus 0.5% of where Baker was last year. Of those 15 quarterbacks, their average points per game in that season where they had the high touchdown rate was 21.4. The next season, it was 17.2, and every single quarterback lost in points per game year over year. Now, the Buccaneers, they should be good offensively, but I think a lot of times when we see these situations and we're like, this team's going to be good, we don't look at how good they were the previous season. The Buccaneers scored 57 touchdowns last year. That's not an easy number to just repeat year over year. Chris Godwin is still banged up right now. Tristan Wirfs is banged up, which could be a really big deal with the offensive line. Getting to 57 touchdowns just will not be some easy thing for them. They can do it for sure, but it's not an easy thing for them to accomplish. And then last year, the Buccaneers saw 72% of their touchdowns. This plays into the touchdown rate thing. 72% of their touchdowns came via the air last year, which is a pretty high number and not something that's very easily repeatable. Liam Cohen's gone. That's another thing that we have to factor in here. I don't know if Baker can repeat those rushing numbers. I actually would bet the under on him, getting to 3.3 rushing points per game once again. The touchdown rate should regress. So to me, like, when you look at the quarterback landscape, we have the elite guys, right? We have the Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jacksons. And maybe some people want to even throw a Joe Burrow in there. But to me, I would much rather just be waiting on a Drake May, who we know is going to give us the rushing upside, who we know could have that huge spike this year, than taking that middle round pick on Baker Mayfield.
I'm also lower than consensus on Baker Mayfield. I have him quarterback 13. I believe his ADP is around quarterback 9.
Yeah, even sooner in some. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's for all the factors and you didn't even mention that Mike Evans is 32. Chris Godwin will be 29 and a half when the season starts and isn't going to be ready when the season starts. And with the Tristan Wirfs thing is terrifying.
Yeah.
And he is expected back at some point, but will he be the same Tristan Wirfs when he returns? Also, this is not a situation like where the Chargers, they can just plug in Joe Alt, a 2-time first-team All-American left tackle, removed, 2 years from playing at Notre Dame, and the number 5 overall pick. They can just plug him in at left tackle and use a guy at right tackle who's at least made starts in the NFL, and Trey Pipkins.
Yeah.
The Bucs have to turn to Charlie Heck at left tackle. This is a huge downgrade. And if you look at the history, like the on-off splits of like Trent Williams with the 49ers or Lane Johnson with the Eagles or Tyron Smith, back when he played for Dallas, this is a really, really big deal and a huge concern for the entire offense.
Yeah, totally agree. Let's hear your next one, Evan.
Breece Hall. And I know that this is a guy that you actually may be a little fond of, but I am not.
Let's hear it.
Hear me out.
Yeah.
So arguably Breece Hall's greatest strength as an NFL running back is his pass-catching acumen and his long-run ability with the ball in his hands. He ran 4.39 at 5'11", 217 coming out of Iowa State. He averaged almost 4 catches per game over his first 3 NFL seasons. But the Jets are going to be like the run-heaviest team in the NFL. The pass attempts are going to be sparing for the Jets this year. We saw even in their first preseason game. I mean, this is not any kind of a great indicator, the first preseason game. But they ran the ball 39 times in their first preseason game. I mean, this is a cultural thing that Aaron Glenn is installing. You remember when Aaron Glenn was the defensive coordinator for the Lions, every time that they'd play the Bears, Justin Fields would run all over the Lions. And Justin Fields is a quarterback who, and I love Justin Fields in fantasy this year.
Sure.
But he's a quarterback who on third down, he is either going to throw the ball to his first read, or he's going to take off and run, or he's going to take a sack.
Yeah.
And that does not lend itself to running back receptions. Yeah. And now we got the Braylon Allen stuff. I mean, Braylon Allen is coming, and he's coming hard. And Isaiah Davis also looks to at least have a minor role. So this is a 3 running back backfield with a running quarterback. And I don't know. I actually think that your best outcome for Breece Hall might be to see him get traded to Dallas. I think that with the Jets, he's going to be a timeshare back who doesn't catch passes and probably doesn't score many touchdowns either.
Yeah, now look, so when I published the draft guide originally on July 1st, I thought, which technically a lot of the players to target were written up in June because I had to get it out on July 1st. I liked Brees at that moment. Now I've since amended that to talk about the Braylon Allen stuff and the coach speak surrounding that, because there's a lot of it's scary, right? The way that they're talking about that backfield and how it's going to be split. Here's the pro argument for Brees, and I want to get your reaction to this. This is semi devil's advocate, but also semi like I do believe in this too, to a decent degree. If you look at their, obviously, like when you're projecting target share, you have 100% target share on a team, right? And if you look at the Jets right now, it's Garrett Wilson and the worst supporting cast that I've honestly ever seen in my life outside of that player, right? Josh Reynolds running as their, is it going to be like Tyler Johnson as their, like?
That's wild, seeing Tyler Johnson in a starting lineup on our lads.
Right, exactly. A dude who's played on like 15 teams in the last 2 years.
Even
right?
Mason Taylor, who was running away with the tight end job, has a high ankle sprain.
Exactly. And so if you look at Brees the last 2 years on a per game basis, 16.9% target share per game, 13.7% target share per game. I think he's very capable based on this personnel. This is strictly target share without layering on top what you're noting, which is the low passing volume that they're going to see. This is strictly target share. I think that just based on what he's done the last 2 years and based on the personnel that they have, we should feel pretty good about like a 15% target share for Brees Hall. Like realistically, I think Brees Hall will finish if he's on the Jets this year, will finish as the number 2 target getter on that team, because there's just no one that is locked into, especially with the Mason Taylor stuff that's been going on. So let's say, just hypothetically speaking, that he sees 50% of the running back rushes. And maybe that's high because of what we've talked about with Braylon Allen and even Isaiah Davis. But 50% is at least a fairish number for running back rushes. And just so that he's not just, when I filter this, we're not just filtering receiving backs, let's say a 15% target share base and a 50% running back rush share base. So we'll get like the Chris Thompson players out of here, right? The guys who are only pass catchers. Get this, since 2011, there's been 43 running backs who have played 8 or more games that have gotten a 15% target share or better and a 50% running back rush share or better, okay? Of those 43 players, none of them finished worse than RB18 in PPR points per game, and only 2 of them finished outside the top 12. Now, I understand that some of those players on that list are studs, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, stud after stud, who were able to get that kind of workload. We still do have, though, like Myles Gaskin and Ramondre Stevenson, Andre Ellington, Fred Jackson, these players who played kind of just a mediocre rushing role with that plus receiving role. And even when you push that down to a 14% target share, you add almost 20 more running backs to the data set. And of those 61, only one of them finished outside the top 20. It was Austin Eckler a couple years ago when he was the RB21. And that was the downturn of his career, which is not the side of the career that Brees Hall is on right now, right? And only 5 of the 61 were outside the top 12. So my bottom line with Brees is, if we do feel okay about the share side of things, like the target share, the backfield share side of things, without factoring in the passing volume in the offense, which totally understand, that's the crux of the argument here. But if you only look at the share, he looks pretty favorable, right? And then I think that the passing volume side, the one area where I feel a little bit more bullish and excited is too strong of a word, would be they're not supposed to be very good this year. And if they're in these negative game scripts, that could really benefit Brees more. Where I think this Brees Hall thing might come down to, and I really want to hear your take on this, is honestly Isaiah Davis. Because Davis was a really good pass. I love Davis. I like both Braylon Allen and Davis coming out last year, but Isaiah Davis, I thought, was a really underrated player who could play a 3-down role. And if you look at what he did down the stretch last year, I mean, it's a small sample, but he was by far the most efficient running back on that team last year. And Braylon Allen, I'm going to give a pass because he was 20 years old. So it's, he's got some time to get a little bit better in the league. But to me, I look at a team like, I don't know, Buffalo, where they do use that 3-headed monster, and they do have that very specific role that they used last year with like a Ty Johnson. And even if Isaiah Davis plays like that kind of role on this team, that to me is what could really cap and ruin Brees Hall this year. Like the early, like I don't think Braylon Allen's going to be more than a 5% target share guy. I think he's going to be more of like the I mean, he might end up with more volume on the ground than Breece Hall this year. There's a realistic chance that happens, and that would obviously hurt Hall too. But I think that the main point with Hall, and like obviously the selling point, is the receiving, and who's going to hurt him more there. It might be Isaiah Davis at the end. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of words to live by for me are like, we can deal sometimes with backfields that have two members and, like a two-way rotation, and either the offense is awesome to support them, or they just run or they just, feature the running backs, they end up both getting a bunch of touches. It's really hard to support three-man backfields, virtually impossible. So there's no question that Isaiah Davis playing a role. I mean, but and he's looking good. Like, if I were you, I would be rooting for Breece Hall to get traded.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's probably the best outcome for him. I'm so stuck on how bad the personnel is on this team at the skill positions, right? And how Breece, we know that he's your argument for Breece, more than I would assume, is not even necessarily anti-Breece the talent, right? It has very little to do with that versus the situation that he's in, which we both agree. The offensive line is actually not bad, but we both agree.
I think it could be awesome.
Yeah, right. But Justin Fields and Tyler Johnson and Josh Reynolds and a banged up rookie tight end, that's rough. That's pretty bad. We can't expect a lot of scores from that. But I think that where I land is that he's probably in some home leagues going to be overdrafted because running backs will get a little bit inflated in that kind of environment. And I would much rather take a lot of wide receivers. But I think within the position, once you get to where he gets drafted, if you're only looking at running backs, strictly just looking at running back rankings, I think he's are you confidently taking Kyren Williams over him?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Kyren, you're James Cook with the situation that's going on with him. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to think of other Chuba Hubbard versus Breece.
Now we're kind of talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a feel.
I think I would still take Chuba.
Okay. All right. But that's about, so you're more
that's the range.
Starting the lower end tight end or RB2s, mid to lower end, as opposed to him being a higher end RB2. Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. And folks can listen to both sides and definitely be a little bit nervous about drafting him. I mean, I've moved him down my rankings with some of the coach speak stuff and the way that Braylon Allen is seemingly going to see some of that early down work. I think Braylon Allen in particular has been a pretty easy click in best ball. I think a guy, the archetype of player that Allen is a much more difficult player to start in your managed league, because it's just going to be, is he going to score this week, or what kind of game script are they going to see? But in a best ball environment, it's a little bit easier to click that name. Let's move on. You know what? I'm just going to go to Chuba Hubbard since we just talked about him. This is probably my most controversial take of the season is my Chuba stance. So last year, so this is the next player on my list is Chuba Hubbard. Last year, Hubbard saw an 83% running back rush share per game. That is not an easy number to replicate. That's like Kyren Williams-esque, right? Which we all are a little bit afraid of Kyren. Even if he sees a dip of 10%, that's the downside of Kyren Williams, right? If he sees a dip of 10% in running back rush share, then all of a sudden, if he maintains the efficiency that he's had, that's not great. And so it's not an easy number to maintain. Part of the reason that he was able to see the workload, in my opinion, that he saw last year, Hubbard, is Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks was out. When Brooks played, if you remember, he played those 3 games, basically 2 games, because that third game he tore his ACL again. In that second game, so you get the first game, he comes back, they're going to ease him in. That second game, they probably feel a little bit better about where he's at. And in that second game, Chuba, Chuba's season-long running back rush share was 83%. In that game, he saw 2/3 of the team's running back rushes, so it was significantly lower than what he had throughout the entire season. And more importantly, and this is really the crux of the argument for not drafting Chuba at cost, Jonathan Brooks saw 3 targets to Chuba 0 in that game. And we know that pass catching really matters, especially for these middle, early to middle round running backs. That's the way that they sort of differentiate themselves and stand out and become league winners in fantasy football. And one way to predict next season target share, I did an episode on this earlier the offseason, is by looking at previous season yards per route run. It's a predictive metric at not just wide receiver, but at running back as well, especially at the extremes. And Chuba was at the extreme last year in a bad way. He had a 0.51 yards per route run rate, which is one of the worst that you're going to find at the running back position. He's now had back-to-back seasons of pretty bad yards per route run rates. And then when you see data like that, you have to ask yourself, like, for instance, like David Montgomery had a really good yards per route run rate last year. But we know intuitively by just understanding football at a very high level that David Montgomery is not going to walk into a 13% target share this year just because he had a high yards per route run rate last year because Jahmyr Gibbs is in the backfield, right? And so when you look at what the Panthers did through their actions this offseason, they add Teteroa McMillan, so that's target share that can go to a true alpha, hypothetically, in that offense. And then look at what they did at running back. They add Rico Dowdle, who's good in pass pro, who can catch passes out of the backfield. And then they drafted Trevor Etienne, who is known as a pass-catching running back. In my opinion, Chuba Hubbard is a great early down back who's going to carry a pretty big workload in this offense behind a good offensive line too, right? So like, I don't think Hubbard is going to totally tank your team per se, especially across the first month of the season. They have a pretty easy schedule. So I don't think that Chuba is like in a void from the standpoint of Zamir White last year, right? This is not a situation like that in my opinion. But I want my RB 15 to 18 that I'm drafting to be able to have a true, in my opinion, like top 6 type ceiling. You know, like if you're looking at Kenneth Walker versus Chuba Hubbard, I'm taking Kenneth Walker all day because I know that Walker, despite the injury, obviously there's some risk with the injury stuff, but we can see that upside in that Kubiak offense and him getting more pass catching work last year. And there's excitement around that fit. With Hubbard, I just worry that there's not going to be a pass catching role for him. And if there's not a pass catching role, you're drafting the RB 17 to be the RB 16 or the RB 15. And that just doesn't do it for me. And I think the biggest argument is that I'm only a couple spots away in running back rank with Chuba, to be honest, like lower than the market. It's the wide receivers that you're drafting around that range. Like you get that like round 4, round 5 wide receiver range. There's so many good players, Jameson Williams and George Pickens. And there's just so many good wideouts there that I'd rather go in that direction. So I think we're going to see a drop in target share for Chuba from that 12 to 13% range he was at last year to more of like the 7 to 8% range. And that's pretty significant when you're trying to calculate ceiling for these guys.
There are a few things to like about Chuba Hubbard, just not very many things to get excited. The ship chasers use a term, small hit, big miss.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of players that you generally want to avoid when that's their range of outcomes. A small hit, but could be a big miss. And Chuba Hubbard, I think, kind of falls into that category. He has shown the ability to handle big workloads. I mean, last 2 years, he had 238 carries in 2023, 250 carries last year. In college, he handled big workloads. That's a good thing. They gave him money. They gave him an extension. And, you know, they poured a ton of resources into their offensive line. Their offensive line is kind of beastly.
It should be great. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the signs point to this being an ascending offense. So there are some things to like about Chuba Hubbard. I draft him every once in a while.
Yeah.
You know, but I definitely never get excited about him because he's still, at the end of the day, a small hit, big miss kind of player.
Yeah, like on DraftKings, for instance, you know, he's like an early 5th oftentimes. I'll get him in the late 5th at times. But like that's enough for me to call him out and just talk. The Chuba thing to me is more about the logic behind it and the kind of way that I think people should be thinking about fantasy football with, like you said, getting the actual big hit out of it instead of it being a little hit, big miss. You know, trying to get like the true ceiling out of that player. You can't just hit singles with all your players throughout your draft. You're not going to win your fantasy championship that way. All right. Next one for you, Evan. Let's hear it.
So Patrick Mahomes has been a losing fantasy pick in each of the last 2 years. Not just, a good real life quarterback, who's been average. No. He's been a losing fantasy pick in each of the last 2 years. He finished below 30 touchdown passes and below 400 rushing yards in both seasons. In 2023, he had a second-round ADP, and he had a third-round ADP last year. His ADP this year is down to round 5, and it's still way too high.
Yeah.
Rashee Rice, who is their difference-making number one receiver, is almost certainly going to miss the first month of the season, maybe the first month and a half. Hollywood Brown, I mean, the guy's just made of glass. I mean, he can't stay healthy. He's hurt again. And Travis Kelce is, just a pure possession catch and fall guy at this stage of his career. It's not happening. This is going to be a team again for the third straight year that is built on its defense and struggles to hit explosive plays, at least until Rashee Rice comes back. Rashee Rice could make a difference.
Yeah.
But by then, I mean, we're a month into the season, month and a half into the season, and Patrick Mahomes has probably not been even usable in fantasy. So, again, I think that his ADP should absolutely be lower than round 5. And I think that for the past couple of years, people have been chasing those 40 touchdown pass seasons from Patrick Mahomes. Like, that just is not going to happen again. Yeah.
And they also, to your point, with Rashee Rice being being suspended potentially to start the season. I mean, technically he's probably a little banged up still, but they open up their season against the Chargers, Eagles, Giants, Ravens. I mean, that's not the easiest start that's a tough start for any quarterback in any offense. And yeah, I mean, I think in situations like this, and I feel this way about like Marvin Harrison Jr., where obviously the talent can be there, but I ask myself, what's changed year over year? What is like tangibly changed? Usually like a coaching change would make me feel more bullish on somebody who maybe is coming off a down season or multiple down seasons. This really all aligns, the Mahomes stuff aligns when Matt Nagy got there or went back there as offensive coordinator. And the last 2 seasons, Mahomes has had sub 7-yard ADOTs. He's not giving us 3 points per game with his legs. He's only done that once during his career. I think that we just got to a point where Mahomes like showed us his statistical ceiling so early in his career, and there's probably somewhat of an anchoring bias going on here.
Also, you notice he's kind of starting to develop a little bit of a belly.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yes, he's got dad. Look, we don't talk down on dad bods here, man. We love dad bods with late round fantasy football. But yeah, I agree. Like again, it kind of falls into like that Baker category for me, where obviously you can see a good passing season coming, but that's not the kind of season that you want to bet on in fantasy football generally. When you're not giving us the rushing production and you're in a single quarterback format, you should just be waiting on not only that, but like even the pocket passers late. None of us should be shocked if like Jordan Love outscores Patrick Mahomes this year, or even a Justin Herbert, whomever. Like there's a lot of more pocket passers that have comparable rushing ceilings, if not better rushing ceilings than Mahomes, because they're talking about Jordan Love maybe running a little bit more this year. Justin Herbert has always had that, and he even did a little bit last year. So like, why are we placing that bet on Mahomes when we know the passing stuff is so volatile to begin with? So I love that call out. Although I did draft him in the Kings Classic this past weekend in Canton because he fell, and I was trying to get a little exposure to him because I know I'm not going to get him anywhere else. All right, I'm going to go to in my opinion, a pretty easy one. I'm going to go to Brian Robinson. I think that the argument I've seen that's pro Robinson is essentially, what if he scores 15 touchdowns this year? Like, what if he's this year's Jamal Williams or this year's LeGarrette Blount or this year's insert early down bruiser and grinder who ends up scoring a lot of touchdowns in a good offense? And I understand that, but I'm just not going to bet on something like that. It's just not my style. Robinson has seen 3%, 7%, and 5% target shares in his 3 seasons in the league. His best running back rush share on a per game basis has been 68%. So if you just look at those top numbers, 7% target share, 68% running back rush share, we've had just 5 top 15 running back performances since 2011 from running backs who have hit those marks or lower. And 2 of those 5 are Nick Chubb, that's prime Nick Chubb, right? One of the best early down running backs that this era has basically seen. I don't want to say that Brian Robinson is that. And this Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt stuff, I don't think is just nothing. Like he, at the very least, like JCM didn't have, or I'll just say Bill didn't have, insane collegiate production. So like the Zap model didn't really love him that much, but he didn't test the combine. So we didn't get like comparable athleticism numbers for him. But seemingly, I think we would all project, if you just watch him, He is easily the most athletic running back on that team right now. When you compare him to Brian Robinson and then the aged Austin Eckler, I actually think though that Krosky Merritt is a bigger threat to Brian Robinson than he is to Austin Eckler. Eckler playing more of that satellite back role officially, like he's not going to see that much work on the ground. And he was actually really efficient per route run last year. Eckler was. He was fine as a receiver. And JCM as a rookie, they likely aren't going to trust him in that role immediately, or maybe even during the season to see like a legit 9-10% target share. I think he's going to be more change of pace on the ground, and it's not going to be that difficult to replace a player who's maybe just an above average, type starter in the league. And so with Robinson, again, it just goes back to like, you look at Fantasy Pros ADP right now, Brian Robinson's going ahead of Stephon Diggs, which might be people aren't reacting to that yet, or, the ADP sources aren't reacting to him being healthy yet. But ahead of Stephon Diggs, Jacoby Myers, Matthew Golden, Ricky Pearsall. Like, again, there's so many, like that top 40 wide receivers have so many good wideouts that I am not going to take an early down back, for a team that has an ascending young player and rookie player over some of those wideouts that could really be difference makers in fantasy football this year.
Mike Leone and I get into arguments about Ricky Pearsall like every day at this point.
Leone's anti-Pearsall, isn't he?
Yeah.
No, I'm all about Richard Pearsall, man.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Ricky. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
He's gonna hate that because he loves you. He's always like, well, JJ said this, JJ said that. I'm gonna bring that up to him.
The year one stuff into year two modeling stuff is not going to love Pearsall that much, but it's really hard for me to get away from. I liked him as a prospect, and obviously he got shot last year, and that's not going to be an easy thing to just overcome. Even if the valleys for him last season were a little bit into his return, right? It was in that like week 11 to 13 range or something like that. Whenever he didn't see or only saw one target on all of his routes run, didn't have a single yard. But yeah, I mean Pearsall. He's actually, this is a spoiler for a couple weeks for when we go over my exposure on DraftKings on becoming a best ball bro. Ricky Pearsall right now, as I'm saying this, is my highest rostered and highest exposed.
Let's go.
DraftKings. Yeah.
Oh, I love to hear that.
Yeah.
He's like one of my top 5.
Don't tell Leone.
But anyways, that was a huge tangent.
That's fine. We went from Brian Robinson to Ricky Pearsall.
Back to Jacory Krosky Merritt, because this is a big deal for Brian Robinson because he is a very volume dependent player.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Jacory Krosky Merritt, I think, is a much bigger threat to Brian Robinson than he is to Austin Eckler. You mentioned that Jacory Krosky Merritt did not participate at the combine. He did have a pro day, and my God.
Yeah.
4.45 at 206 pounds. 41.5-inch vertical, 10'4" broad jump. I mean, this guy is an absolute athlete. I know he bounced around colleges and he didn't really play much in college, but he only had 7 career receptions. So I think that he is an early down guy.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's a big concern for Brian Robinson.
100%. And honestly, it's weird because the market has reacted more to Austin Eckler getting bumped down. Eckler gets drafted, and I'm not saying that Eckler's this obvious target or anything like that, right? But Eckler's been bumped down, and Robinson hasn't been bumped down as much. Especially where they get drafted, right? Being bumped down in round 15 to 16 is nothing, or just not that big of a deal. But the fact that Robinson's ADP hasn't shifted I just don't think it's shifted nearly as much as it should, based on what we just talked about, and Bill being a bigger threat to B-Rob's workload. Bill's a great nickname, by the way.
I don't even get it, but I know that he does call himself that, though.
He does call, and it's a lot easier than saying Jacory Krosky Merritt on a podcast. Yeah. All right, let's hear your next one, Evan.
Evan Ingram. So we had an emailer email in maybe a week ago. Does Silva is this a mistake? Silva doesn't have Evan Ingram in his top 150. And what I really try to do is I have 15 quarterbacks and 15 tight ends, and then the rest is running backs and wide receivers. And Evan Ingram just happens to be tight end 17. So he's not going to be in the top 150 at on principle. But I have him tight end 17 or maybe even tight end 18 because I'm just not intrigued by him at all in Denver. You want to talk about volume dependency. Evan Ingram is the most volume dependent tight end in the league. He's averaged fewer than 9 yards per reception in 3 of the last 4 years. He's a catch and fall guy.
Yeah.
He hasn't gone over 4 touchdowns in individual seasons since 2017. He doesn't block, so he's only going to be a rotational player on a defense-oriented Broncos team, and he's going to split time with Adam Troutman. Sean Payton loves Adam Troutman. In their preseason opener, they were sharing time. Adam Troutman blocks. So I don't think that Evan Ingram is helping anyone in fantasy football this year. When you get into the tight end twos, you're really touchdown hunting.
Yeah.
And Evan Ingram has never been a big-time touchdown scorer, and I don't think he's going to score a lot of touchdowns this year either as a rotational player on a defense-oriented Broncos team.
Yeah, I mean, look, the favorable argument for Ingram, I think, is, historically, breakout tight ends, guys who outpace their ADP. Obviously, breakout's not the right word for a guy who's a little bit older, but these breakout tight ends will come from teams that don't have locked in multiple wide receivers locked in, like with high ADPs. You only have Cortland Sutton there. So hypothetically, this is why Tucker Kraft is really attractive, because there's this opening.
Love Tucker Kraft.
Yeah, there's this opening there for someone to step up and step in and be the number one. I mean, for that team, the number one target getter on that team, right? With Ingram, we're saying, what if he could be the number 2? But as time has gone on, I've gotten less and less bullish on Ingram when thinking about how this team may operate this year. You mentioned their defense, and they have a great defense, an elite offensive line, and that usually is not the best combination for a high volume passing approach, right? And the other thing too is that if you look at how they've seemed to deploy / want to deploy RJ Harvey, if you want to use the Joker argument, and this is what I was using the Joker argument a little bit in July for Evan Ingram, and I've kind of been like I said, like lowering him in my rankings, not feeling as good about him. RJ Harvey might end up just being that dude for them, and he might be the mismatch dude for them in 2025, because that Joker role that, I think is a little bit overblown in general in the way that they talk about it, but that Joker role has been Sproles, has been Kamara, has been backs just as much as it's been Jimmy Graham. And so I don't think that it's a lock that Ingram is playing that spot, despite when he signed, or when he went there, he tweeted a Joker gif to the world.
Well, Sean Payton was asked before training camp whether he saw Evan Ingram as the Joker, and Sean Payton was like, yeah, he could maybe do some of those things.
I think maybe they had the idea pre-draft, and then they got their dude, and after doing evals and stuff, and they because I think that the arrow to me is pointing up for both the backs in that backfield. Like, I love both Dobbins and RJ Harvey. I think both of them can hypothetically eat and pay off at cost. But yeah, the arrow's just been pointing down for me with Ingram. Part of this too has been his cost seems to be at least stagnant and / rising based on the fact that a lot of analysts are in, and I was into it. Like I said, this is a player that I've been changing my mind on quite dramatically. So I'm glad that you shouted him out on the show today. Staying
on the RJ Harvey topic, did you see this? So RJ Harvey is like a big buzz guy in fantasy right now, because when the Broncos came out with their depth chart, he was like 6th on the depth chart.
Right.
And then, so, the J.K. Dobbins cheerleaders were taking their victory laps, and then they come into the preseason game and RJ Harvey gets like all the first team reps. So then is a massive swing, and all the RJ Harvey cheerleaders, they're taking their victory laps. Did you see this though?
Is it the helmet thing?
Ben Albright, who covers the Broncos, was asked about this. Some guy goes, RJ Harvey started on offense, and then Ben Albright tweeted, yeah, it was supposed to be J.K. Dobbins, though. He was supposed to start. I don't know what happened. He couldn't find his helmet or something.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so maybe J.K. Dobbins was supposed to start, but he couldn't find his helmet. So RJ Harvey, I don't know why I'm having such a problem saying his name. He got all the first team reps, so on to preseason game 2, I guess.
That's hilarious. It's so both of those, literally both running backs were players to target for me in my initial launch of the guide. It's an offense that's going to support that kind of role. I mean, we know they've been, Sean Payton teams have been top 6 in running back target share since 2011, every single year. So, I do. And not only that, that is going to likely take away from Ingram a little bit too, which sucks because again, he's been more volume dependent than anything else. All right, you talk about Evan Ingram. I'm going to go to, I should have probably segued your Mahomes thing to this guy, but I'll go with the tight end. I'll talk Travis Kelce. Look, we don't know what's going to happen exactly with the Rashee Rice stuff. What's your estimate? Like 4 to 6 games?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll say, I mean, if it comes out today after we, before we publish this episode, this is a Monday that we're recording this, but yeah, I mean, like 4 to 6 games seems to be where Rice will be suspended. And that means that Rice would hypothetically be playing a good 10 plus games for the Chiefs this year. Last year in the small sample with Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce averaged 5 PPR points per game and a 14% target share with Rashee Rice active last year in the 3 games, which is horrific. And then, you look at how he performed. He was a tight end 6 in PPR points per game last year on a 25% target share. He was still just a tight end 6. His yards per route run, 1.43, the worst of his career. His yards after the catch per reception, the worst of his career. And so I just don't know why the market seems to be assuming that what he did last year from a volume perspective is going to carry over. The only argument that I can make is maybe some touchdown regression, like that's the crux, I think, to the pro side for Travis Kelce. But even still, like, I'm a fan of Jalen Royals. I think that he's a good prospect. I think he was a good prospect, and he's literally his top comp in the Zap model was Rashee Rice. So I think that he can fit in, in that role pretty nicely. Xavier Worthy is another year in, and so he should command more of a target share in the offense. Hollywood Brown isn't at least out for the season right now. He is banged up because he can't stay healthy. But and then I even think, Noah Gray is a good backup tight end and someone who could see more work in the offense. And then Isaiah Pacheco's healthy right now too. I mean, it's a healthier offense in general that I think can still target share. So if Travis Kelce ends up seeing a 20% target share instead of a 25% target share this year, and he maintains that per route run efficiency, that's a disaster in fantasy football. Like that's really bad news. Since 2014, we've had 46 tight ends play 8 or more games in their current season while running 200 more routes in their N-1 season, so the previous season. Of those 46, there were 11 of them who were coming off seasons with a sub 1.5 yards per route run rate, okay? So we're looking at these tight ends who had bad yards per route run rates the previous season in this kind of range that Travis Kelce's going in. Of those 11, only 3 of them outperformed their ADP expectation in points per game. And those 11 performed on average almost 2 PPR points per game below expectation. So there's a lot of market trends that don't favor Travis Kelce. There's a lot of age trends that don't favor Travis Kelce. And there's a lot of efficiency trends that don't favor Travis Kelce. I know that people are going to buy into the he's in better shape this year narrative. When has that ever been something that has worked out for us as fantasy players? So I'm going to mostly fade Kelce this year.
As someone who actively fell in love with Taylor Swift when I saw her at Soldier Field 2 years ago, I am here for all the Travis Kelce shade. So yeah.
It's a tough buy for me. All right, so I think you have one more, right?
One more guy, and I mean this is kind of a gimme, but it's Najee Harris. I just looked at his Fantasy Pros ADP, and he was like still right around a top 100 player, and I please don't draft this guy.
Yeah.
Obviously everybody knows by now he got into a fireworks accident in July, and he is not healthy yet. He never had upside in the first place. I mean, this is going to be Omarion Hampton's backfield. I talked to an optometrist. I'm not a doctor.
Wow.
I talked to an optometrist. I'm friends with an optometrist, and I asked him, what's your level of concern about Najee Harris? And he was like, I think he's going to end up losing the eye. He's like, any eye injury that you suffer, it generally will be healed within 3 days. And it's been over a month now. I obviously I hope that Najee Harris does not lose his eye.
Yeah.
But like this optometrist, and he's really good. He went to UT Austin, really smart dude. And I mean, he's like, I think he's going to end up losing the eye. Like eye injuries heal fast, and it's been over a month, and Najee Harris's eye is not healed.
So because I was fading Najee before all of this happened. That's not a brag or anything like that. I'm not predicting him to get in a fireworks accident, right? But it was more so like you said, I never saw the ceiling outcome. Like, it was just not there when they drafted Amari and Hampton. How high are you then on Amari and Hampton? Because
huge.
Yeah. Okay.
I have him 25th overall.
Okay.
So, I mean, I've been getting a ton of Omari and Hampton. Just every time I'm in the third round, I'm looking for Omari and Hampton.
Yeah, you can't undersell the fact that typically in these scenarios, and we even saw it with Breece Hall, who we talked about earlier in his rookie season, right? Where these guys who are clearly the best back in their backfield as rookies, they don't just get the workload immediately, because if there is a veteran or if there is another player sitting there to get some of that work, those guys will get some of that work. But you can't undersell the fact that Hampton now is doing this without competition. I mean, there's no one there really in his way. Whereas if Najee Harris were to be healthy, we might see more of a second half breakout for Amari and Hampton as opposed to, an early season breakout. But now the early season breakout is very much on the table. So I'm with you. I'm very high on Amari and Hampton as well. I'm going to go to the final player here. I'm going to talk about Jerry Jeudy. So Joe Flacco starting this season is only going to push Jerry Jeudy's ADP upwards. And it sounds like Flacco is in the driver's seat to be, the starter and that dude for them to start the season. But I'll ask you this, Evan. What do you think the over-under? I'll set the over-under for you. Flacco starts this year, over-under 8.5 starts for Flacco.
Oh, I think that's right about where it should be. I would say between 7 and 9. I think 9 would be a really good outcome for the cause of Jeudy and Njoku.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting here and I'm looking at a guy like Jeudy, where, of course, Flacco's the best option for that passing attack. I think we'd all agree. But the thing that I have a hard time with, and this is the same thing that we see with Jameis Winston. He's good for fantasy football. Flacco is not some savior as a real football quarterback. And Jameis is not a So Jameis was struggling last year. While all these good, crazy numbers were happening for the Browns, he was still struggling from a real football perspective. That matters because they can bench the player, and the Browns have multiple options now that they're going to want to test out outside of Joe Flacco. And here's the thing. Last year, there was a 7-week period where Jeudy had Jameis, and he averaged 21.1 PPR points per game. He was on fire. He was a beast. He had almost a 25% target share during that stretch. But outside of that split, he averaged 9.3 PPR points per game and a 21% target share. And with Cedric Tillman from week 7 to 11, because they traded Amari Cooper and Cedric Tillman became the perimeter guy outside of Jeudy. With Tillman from week 7 to week 11, Jeudy had a little over 14 PPR points per game and a target share per game of 19.6%, which is it's fine. It's not elite, but it's fine. But the problem was that was still with Winston, and nothing has really changed for Jerry Jeudy. Jeudy didn't all of a sudden become some elite player at wide receiver where he's going to be able to sustain a 21 point per game average. His per route run numbers were pretty much the same throughout his entire career as what we saw last year. His targets per route run was actually below his career average last year. The reason he was so good in fantasy football, no human being in the NFL ran more routes than Jerry Jeudy last season. He ran more routes than every other player in football. They dropped back a lot. Cleveland had the highest targeted attempts in the entire league last season. I just don't see that continuing. I mean, that's regression waiting to happen. They go out, they draft Quinshon Judkins. Obviously, he's not been able to find the field because of the off the field stuff, but they also drafted Dylan Sampson. It's a team that has younger quarterbacks. Like I said, they're going to want to test out. And if they have these younger quarterbacks, they're likely going to try to be more run heavy than they were last year. And if you look at where he's being ranked, here are the wide receivers he's being ranked ahead of that I would draft over Jerry Jeudy right now. Stephon Diggs, Jacoby Myers, Rome Odunze, Ricky Pearsall. I would take all 4 of those wide receivers over Jeudy because we have to think, maybe he gets off to a decent enough start because Joe Flacco is going to be starting for them. But the most important part of the fantasy season, there's a greater than 90% chance that it's going to be like Shedeur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel or some other quarterback that we don't feel as confident can lift and sustain the pass catchers in that offense. So I think that he's a floor play, not a ceiling one. This, honestly, I think that Jeudy is kind of, even to a larger degree, but kind of in that Chuba Hubbard bucket, where I do think that it's like you said, it's a big miss, small hit kind of situation where I have a hard time seeing Jeudy really finishing as like a top 24 wide receiver this year.
Yeah, I think that the Browns are going to end up having 4 quarterbacks who make starts this year. Kenny Pickett, I think the plan was for Kenny Pickett actually to start week 1 before he pulled his hamstring, which got to be a pretty bad hamstring pull because he has been out for a while.
Yeah.
And then I was listening to Zach Jackson, who's covered the Browns for a long time. He covers them for The Athletic on a podcast recently. And he's like, they are also intent on making sure that they get some starts out of Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel. And this was before Shedeur Sanders had a pretty nice preseason opener.
Yeah.
Because they have to at least have some idea of what they have in these guys.
Yes.
Because, that's going to determine whether or not they use a very high pick or try to trade up for a quarterback next year.
Yeah.
So they are like super motivated to figure out, to start like multiple quarterbacks over the course of the season. This is going to be a carousel.
Yeah, and why wouldn't they, right? Like, I mean, look, you and someone might be asking why start Flacco at all. Well, you still want to get an understanding of the rest of the team. If it's, if he's the most competent quarterback, you need to have the most competent quarterback at least start some games for you to have a good understanding of what their pass catchers can do, and the rest of the team can do. But man, end of the season stuff. I mean, what kind of percent would you put on Joe Flacco not start a non-Flacco quarterback starting week 15 to 17, the fantasy playoffs? Like we're talking greater than 90% here. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say like 85%.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a really high likelihood. And so just because of that, even you could say, all right, maybe Jeudy hits ADP, matches ADP up until then, but I still don't even think that's the case. Just given his splits with and without Cedric Tillman, they draft Harold Fannin, who could be an interesting, because they run a lot of 12 personnel. They also have Deontay Johnson there now. Maybe he wins out the slot job. We'll see. But regardless, like it's not that clean of a situation, and they're not going to throw nearly as much as they did last year. So to me, Jeudy, he's a fade for me. All right, Evan, this was great. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you guys are working on over at Establish the Run.
Yeah, I'm working on that Shy Away article right now, 30 guys to avoid in fantasy drafts. My top 150 is updated every single day. The tiers are updated every single day. We got a lot of podcasts, establishtheRun.com, Establish the Run on iTunes and YouTube. We're trying to get our YouTube numbers up, so come subscribe.
Yeah, and I will always back my boys over at ETR. There's a lot of good synergy with like what I produce at Late Round Fantasy Football and then what you guys do over at ETR. So definitely check them out. If you guys haven't checked out the draft guide, the Late Round draft guide, go do that over on lateround.com. Make sure you're subscribed to this podcast feed as well as our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. Otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.